Hello, everyone, and welcome to this talk for Summer Celebration 2021. I'm glad that you can join us for this great event again this year. And of course, everyone looks forward to being back together here real soon. My name is Andy Pulte. I'm from the Department of Plant Sciences at the University of Tennessee. And I am housed in Knoxville. Work quite a bit with our Plant Sciences Department again, but also with the State Botanical Garden of Tennessee in our Knoxville location. Today I'm just going to talk to you as quickly as I can really about tree and shrub planting and how to get that right from the very beginning because we do want to make sure that as we purchase new plant material that it's getting in the ground in a proper way. And so this really is just a short intro, a beginning of knowledge really of learning how to do tree and shrub planting. If you're a new gardener or an experienced gardener, I think we're going to talk about a few things that are going to be a little bit helpful for you today. So there are pieces of terminology that everyone needs to know when it comes to planting trees and shrubs. And there are a variety of ways that people buy trees and shrubs. And one way is containerized. A lot of the plant material that you see at our plant sales, both in Jackson and in Knoxville, they're containerized trees and shrubs. And that comes with a whole set of rules for planting and understanding how those plants can be put in the ground. Some people, especially if you're a fruit tree grower, you may see bare root trees and shrubs, in particular bare root trees, and those are typically purchased in the dormant months and then planted out, and then they break bud in the spring and grow. And they have a set of care requirements that are different from containerized trees. And in fact, a lot of the trees that we sell at our plant sales come into us bare root, and we actually put them in containers, and that's a good way to help with shipping costs. It makes it, you don't have all that soil, and so shipping is a lot cheaper. And you may, especially with bigger trees and shrubs, you may see B and B or balled and burlapped, and you'll hear nursery people refer to this as B and B. What it really means is balled and burlapped. And you can see that there's string on this, there's wire on this, and this comes with a whole set of rules and ways to plant this properly. That if you know how to do that, it can really help with the long-term survivability of those pieces of plant material. Here I'm showing you some B&B trees and trees that are what we call holed in, and this is often how a nursery will keep their balled and burlap trees healthy. Will actually set them on the ground, and then they'll cover them with mulch. And the trees actually do quite well. They'll start to grow into that mulch here in the nursery, but it's also easy for the nursery to pick them up and then move them. Now, when it comes to trees in particular, one of the first pieces of terminology that we want to talk about is the root flare. What is the root flare? Well, it's these buttressing roots that come out at the bottom of the tree. And if you go into the native woodland, and I think really one of the best ways to learn how to plant trees at the proper depth is to go out and observe in the native woodlands, even around your house, trees that have just grown naturally, and observe what those trees look like. Because then you start going to like a shopping center, you start going to the parking lot, and you start looking at those trees, and you're going to probably see some differences, in particular if those trees have not been planted at a proper depth. So what do we see? We see these roots flaring out. We see these buttressing roots at the bottom of this tree, and this is the way that we want the trees in our home landscape to look as well. Now, before you plant, we always encourage you to call to make sure that all your utilities are marked. 811 is the number to know for that, where you can actually have someone come out and mark all the utilities. In particular, in new neighborhoods where there are underground utilities, you definitely want to be aware of that. A lot of great resources out there online. Here I'm showing you a picture of a graphic from the National Arbor Day Foundation, a place I actually used to work before I moved to Tennessee. I worked for the National Arbor Day Foundation in Nebraska City, Nebraska. And they've got a lot of great resources that can help you with tree planting to make sure that you know what you're doing. Here's just a few tips. I love this list. I think it's a good list. Again, call before you dig. 811 is the hotline typically in most states to get your utilities marked. Even if you know where you're pretty confident where your utilities are, it's not a bad idea to get those things marked just to make sure that you're covering yourself. If you're a commercial landscaper watching this, man, you want to do that at least 2 weeks prior to working on any property. And then number two here, handling plant material with care. You know, plants are resistant, trees are resistant and resilient to the way that we handle them. But we want to make sure that we are handling them with as much care as we can. Here it says always lift tree by the root ball. Carrying things around, by the stems, that kind of stuff can damage those plants. Uh, we'll see that, a lot of times, moving plant material around, we'll just kind of pick them up willy-nilly, but we want to be as careful with those plant pieces of plant material as possible. In particular with the B&B trees, we want to be moving those by the root ball, not by the stem. We want to dig a proper hole, always making the hole 2 to 5 times wider than the diameter of the root ball, and we like that with sloping sides. Now, depth. You can, if you dig down to China, that's not going to make much of a difference because in any tree, in particular, let's just talk about trees, 90% of that tree's root mass is going to be in the top 12 inches of soil. Let me say that again. Any tree, 90% of the root mass is going to be in the top 12 inches of the soil. And so really digging a hole for your plant material that is wider is so much more important than digging deep. And in fact, if you dig too deep, you can actually run into some settling problems, in particular with larger plant material. And then filling that hole, we never really encourage you to add a bunch of amendments to the soil. You don't need to put in 16 bags of compost in with your tree. Just having loose soil, that native soil, backfilling into that hole is probably one of the best things that you can do. Now mulch, we always get into problems with and going overboard with mulch. I love to have a very large mulch ring. We're talking about diameter. In some cases, 6 to 10 foot, all the way from one side of the circle to the other side of the circle. I'll have a mulch ring for a larger 2-inch caliper tree, but I do try to make that mulch ring all the way out to the drip line, a big mulch ring. Bartlett Tree Research Foundation, they've done a lot of research with this, and you can actually go and look at some of their resources, but they've done 20-year studies where they've got mulch rings where the mulch is at the proper depth, just 1 to 2 inches of mulch, maybe 2 to 3 inches of mulch, not too deep mulch, and they've got mulch rings that are at just 1 foot, 2 foot, 10 foot, and of course that reduced competition, in particular from your grass, having a larger circumference of your mulch ring is going to help reduce the competition and actually make that tree grow faster. And so in those studies, they see year over year that the trees with the larger mulch rings actually have larger growth, more steady growth, and they're bigger over a 20-year period. And so, I really do encourage you not to make these little tiny mulch rings around your trees. Make them big, make them 5 foot, make them 6 foot, make them 10 foot, whatever you can tolerate. Try to make those tree rings quite large to reduce the competition from the grass, and it makes it easier. Also, one of the big things is you're less likely to mechanically damage your tree trunk, like hitting it with a lawnmower, with a weed eater, that kind of stuff. And so maintaining those mulch rings is a really good thing. Here's just another little graphic, and I like this graphic because it actually shows you the depth of the tree and how you really want that root flare to be at the top level of the soil. Let me go just back one time here. This one mentions as well. I think I must have skipped the planting depth one, but you want to make sure that that tree is at a depth where that root flare, and let me go back to that picture of that root flare, where this root flare is actually at or slightly above the plane or the surface of the soil. And other studies that I've read and seen and been a part of is that it really is so beneficial to have these trees slightly above the soil level, at or slightly above, always trying to think maybe even slightly above is good. And we're not talking about 6 to 12 inches. We're talking about 1 to 2 inches above the grade of that soil is such a good thing, making sure that you expose that root flare completely. Now, we want to always get started the right way. Here's uh, me on a crew, working with a crew, handling really one of the biggest trees that I've ever planted. These trees were so big that only 3 or 4 of them could fit on an entire semi truck. But we want to make sure that we do get started real well, and there's just some things to look out for. I always am inspecting the plant material when I get it, even from reputable nurseries. They make mistakes too. Things happen. And here is a big B&B osmanthus that's been planted, and they had a metal staking rod in there. Well, I think that really that for the survivability of this plant, that rod is not going to really impact this plant long term. But what if this tree ever needs to be removed? That could be a real bad situation for somebody with a chainsaw later on, 20 years down the road when I'm not around. And so I'm going to do my best to try to get rid of that to make sure that there's nothing in there that could hurt somebody in the future. And in this case, it's a big metal rod that they had used for staking, probably when this tree was just planted, and then it kind of got forgotten about. And so that was really hard. It actually looked like a stem to me. I'm like, what is that in there? And so kind of dug a little bit deeper. A lot of B&B trees, all B&B trees typically are wrapped in metal wire. Now, there are a variety of studies out that do a lot of different tests. Do you remove the metal wire from a balled and burlap tree, or do you not? And really, there is no definitive answer. Some people would say different to that, but really, from all the studies I've looked at, really, there's no definitive answer. Uh, the metal wire does not go away very quickly. I've dug up trees, that are 20 years old that were planted 25 years ago, and there's still metal wire there. Some cases it's rusted away, but in a lot of cases it's still absolutely 100% intact. When roots do impact that, they tend to grow around it. It doesn't cause a lot of major issues to the structure of the root system. So what I do when I'm planting a tree is uh, it depends on the size of the tree. If it's huge, huge, huge tree, I leave that metal wire basket off, and then once it's in the hole, I cut the basket, the top couple rings of that basket off. If it's a smaller plant like the one that I'm working with here, I'll try to cut that whole metal wire basket off. I've always said, I don't like to put trash in the hole, and I kind of consider that metal wire trash. And so cut off as much as you can. It's not absolutely critical. I do really think that you should try to cut off with metal snips the top ring of that metal wire basket, and that really is helpful. If you don't do it, will it be the end of this tree? Will it be cause of failure for this tree? Probably not. Probably not. I'm also always looking out for different things. Here's another kind of, this is along the lines of that metal rod. I was planting this B&B weeping Alaskan cedar, and I noticed a little bit of fabric. And what had happened is that this nursery had planted this tree in a grow bag, a fabric grow bag, a non-biodegradable fabric grow bag, and then they had kind of forgotten about it. And then they dug it up with a spade, balled and burlapped it, and so there was actually a layer here, and I think I can use my mouse where you can kind of see me trace the layer of this, where there was this grow bag, which is actually a root pruning grow bag, where roots are meant to grow through it, but they're pruned. Basically, if this was above ground, it was supposed to prune the roots when it was above ground, but then it was wrapped again in burlap, and then it was wrapped again in this metal wire. It's like, well, is not going. Would this tree survive? Well, it probably would survive, but really, it would not have allowed its root mass to go much further than this grow bag, which was just, maybe 12, 13 inches in diameter. And so we removed that whole thing, and those trees have survived. They've done quite well and lived now 3 or 4 years, and so we're still watching them, but glad to get that grow bag off of them. A couple other things. Here on the left side, I'm looking at what we call a girdling root, and this root will 100% completely cut off that side of the tree, kind of a simple way to put it. And so I'm actually, before I plant this tree, I noticed this root that was on the edge of, on one of the sides of this balled and burlap tree that I was about to plant. And so I actually went in there very carefully and cut a section of that girdling root out, because I know that's tough on that tree, removing that big root at the time of planting, but long term, that is going to be the very best thing for that tree, because it's literally going to be choking off the side of that tree. And you can actually, you should start doing this. You start going to shopping centers, or even maybe in your own home yard. If you start to feel the sides of trees, especially smooth bark trees like maples, you can actually, if you feel kind of a flattish side to that tree, it's probably got a girdling root. You think of tree trunks as round, but if you start to feel, especially down low on a tree trunk, and that is flat, it probably has a girdling root that you can't see, and so look out for that. Now, planting depth, here with my hand in the photo, that is how far I excavated down in a balled and burlap tree before I found that root flare that we talked about. And I want that root flare, of course, to be at or slightly above the ground level. And so 4-6 inches here, I have taken off the top. What happens a lot is when they dig these trees, actually the soil gets kind of lumped up over the top of the root flare. And so you have to really excavate that. This can happen with container trees. They can be planted too deeply. And so when I'm planting a tree, one of the first thing I do is I'm making sure that I can see that root flare. And almost 100% of the time, I have to take off some soil off the top to make sure that that root flare is exposed. Yeah, here back to girdling roots. Here's just a picture on a container tree where you can see a root that needs to be removed before planting, because 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the road, this will be a big root and way harder to remove. And so at the time of the planting, I'm going to remove that girdling root. And one thing people don't often realize is that girdling roots can happen at all stages of nursery production. And so you go to the nursery and you buy this very large 15-gallon container plant, but that plant has been in this pot, and it's been in the middle pot, and it's been in all of these pots up to the point where it was in a big 15-gallon container. And root defects like girdling roots can happen at any stage in that production. And so I'm looking, once I expose that root flare, I'm looking for defective roots. And we're being very simplistic, kind of, that could potentially impact that tree over time. And then once I get the plant in the ground, I typically use a process that I call mudding, or mudding it in. And this is completely saturating the hole. This picture on the left is very common. What I'll be doing is I will actually be jamming a hole down into that jamming a hose down into that soft soil, and with kind of a low hose, not like a fire hose, but kind of a medium to low running hose, and I'm putting that down into the soil and letting that sometimes fill up 10-15 minutes. It might take until that soil completely saturates. And what happens is that if you completely saturate that soil, it'll settle back down. It'll take out any air pockets. It'll make sure that that tree is settled in completely. And so I think this is absolutely critical to what I call mud these trees in when they're planted, in particular balled and burlap trees. And so I will, go around the edges of a tree, and I will I'll stick that hose down into the soil. And a lot of times that water will just completely disappear. You'll be amazed at, like, where is this water going? And then eventually you'll see it bubbling up at the surface. You really want that tree to be really completely settled in. Then the last step is always mulch. I've talked about how I really like large mulch rings, but mulch provides a variety of great things for your trees and your shrubs. Deters weeds, cools the soils, replenishes nutrients as it breaks down. It's aesthetically pleasing. Then it really does hold the soil in place during long rains. Now, what kind of mulch should you use? Well, I like any just ground hardwood mulch. You can use wood chips, whatever it is. that you find aesthetically pleasing. I steer away from synthetic products, rubber mulches. I just don't think that that's great. It doesn't add into anything into the soil. Uh, Trees can grow in gravel type mulches if that's something that's aesthetically pleasing to you, but it doesn't add a lot. It doesn't add back into the soil, and so we like to use organic mulches of a variety of different kinds to make sure that you are cooling that soil, but also replenishing nutrients over time. People always ask about fertilizing trees and shrubs after you plant them. Typically, that is done in the spring. General rule of thumb: fertilizers should be applied from just prior to bud break through the end of the first flush of growth. I don't find a lot of benefit to fall fertilization with a lot of our home garden trees and shrubs. Using a balanced fertilizer at a low rate is typically very good. You don't want trees in particular to grow too quickly once they're in the ground. You don't want them to grow too quickly. You can uh, really lead, if you've got big flushes of growth, to spring storm damage. That happens if you over fertilize and those trees start to grow too quickly. And fertilizer is not always necessary or desirable, and so don't feel pressure to fertilize trees if the tree is showing signs of nutrient deficiency, yellow leaves, discolored veins, that kind of stuff. Then look into what that nutrient deficiency might be and look at how the proper way is to apply those nutrients. I do want to send you over to another video on how that I prepared on planting shrubs in particular. If you're interested in that, there's the link up there. But if for some reason the tech wizards can't figure out a way to go directly to that other video, go onto YouTube, search for my YouTube channel, which is Plant Sleuth, right there on YouTube. And then I have a playlist on how to plant anything, and check out the video on how to plant shrubs like a pro. And that will give you information on how specifically to plant shrubs. I am so grateful that you've joined me here for just a couple minutes to talk about the very basics, and we've just scratched the surface. Hopefully you've got more questions about how to plant trees and shrubs, and you can learn about that more through your own research or asking great questions, and then getting out there and doing it on your own, and also observing trees and shrubs that have been planted properly or improperly. And I think that with a few of these tips, you're going to really learn how to do that over time. I'm Andy Pulte. Thank you so much for joining me here for this presentation, and I hope you have a great day.